Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my September wrap-up. So these are going to be all of the books that I read in September. In September I read 8 books, which is a little bit less than I have been reading for the past few months. The past few months I feel like I've been reading upwards of like 12 books or more. So it's a little bit less, but still a respectable number of books. I'm like still happy with 8 books. That's still a lot of books to read in a month. So I'm still feeling good about it. But it was a slower reading month for me, and part of that is because for part of the month I wasn't really loving the books I was reading, and some of them, like maybe I should have DNF'd, but I didn't for various reasons. The month, like, it had kind of a mediocre start to it, and then it had like a real rough middle, and then a pretty strong ending. So, had a lot of highs and lows, ups and downs with my reading in September. But I found I had at least one book that I really loved, which was at the end of the month, and I'm so glad that I read it. But let's get started. The first book that I finished in September is actually one that I had been reading for a couple of months, like slowly but surely, which is The Emotional Life of Your Brain by Richard Davidson and Sharon Begley. And this is a nonfiction book about how emotions affect your brain, and a little bit about, there's some stuff about how meditation and mindfulness affects your brain as well. I was reading this for a professional training that I'm doing, and so I didn't really get to choose this book, but there were some parts of this that I thought were interesting. Mostly what he's talking about is he has a theory of emotional styles, and that there are 6 components, I think, that go into your emotional style, which are your resilience, outlook, social intuition, self-awareness, sensitivity to context, and attention. So those are the 6 styles, or the 6 dimensions of your emotional style, and then each one is kind of on a spectrum, and then there's like a quiz in here that you can take to see where you are on the spectrum of each of those dimensions. He talks about how each of these dimensions, you don't want to be in the extreme on any of them, that it's much better to be like towards the middle, and kind of why it would be bad to be really extremely high or low for each of them. I didn't think that his arguments for all of them made sense. Sometimes it felt like he was kind of stretching a little bit just to have consistency across all of the dimensions. But overall, I thought that the theory was interesting, and I think that it could be a really good way to like enter conversations, that like especially using the quiz and the 6 dimensions could be a really useful way to have conversations with people about the way that they handle emotions and different kinds of situations. I think this could be a really interesting like conversation starter, of course for like in certain contexts, not with like strangers. The next book that I finished in September is another one that I had started this in August, I think, and just finished it in September. And I was actually listening to the audiobook, but I really enjoyed the audiobook, so I ended up buying the physical book as well, because I'm intending to continue the series, and I really liked this one. This is The Curse of Chalian by Lois McMaster Bujold. So I've read another series by her that's actually, well, I've read 2 other series by her, but at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, I think, I was reading her Penric and Desdemona series, which is a series of novellas that takes place in the same world as this trilogy. So this is actually the original trilogy that's called The Realm of the Five Gods, and the Penric and Desdemona is a companion series that she wrote after, so I thought I'd go back and read the original trilogy. So this is a adult high fantasy. It's like a slow political fantasy. Our main character is Kaz, who at the beginning of the book is traveling home from like years of trials that he was a soldier, I think, for a while, and then he had been taken on like a slave ship. He's finally gotten himself out, and now he is trying to head home. So all of that has already happened in his past, and in his mind he is returning as a broken man whose life has been destroyed, and he's just hoping to kind of eke out the rest of his life. But when he returns, he does go to the royal family to pledge his service because he had served them before, and they remember who he is, and he actually gets assigned to tutor and protect one of the princesses. And so that is where his story kind of takes off and then gets wrapped up in the politics of this royal family and this country and world again. As I said, I really enjoyed this book. I think that this world is really interesting, which I knew from reading the Penric and Desdemona novellas, and that's why I wanted to come back and read this one, because I liked this world. And one of the things that I like so much about this is that the gods are very present. It has a specific religious system in this world that is the 5 gods. There is the mother, the father, the son, the daughter, and the bastard. I just think the religious system that they have in this world seems very well thought out. It's not like they don't hit you over the head with it, I feel like, but it's so infused into the world. The religious system is also involved with the way magic works in this world, because their magic works through gods and through like demons, kind of. I'm excited to read the rest of the series. I already have the next 2 books in the series to read. I think that I'm going to really like Lois McMaster Bujold's writing style. I was listening to this as an audiobook, which you can still get a feel for their writing style through an audiobook, but I feel like I get a better idea of how I feel about a writing style from actually reading the book. And I'm thinking I might try reading the second book as a physical book, because especially since this was a slow political fantasy, it did get confusing sometimes to listen to the audiobook, because there are a lot of different names of people from different countries and you have to keep track of them and like who's, you know, in alliance with who and who are the ones betraying who and all of that. So the next one I might read as a physical book. But I gave this one, I think, 4 stars, and I'm excited about this series. So now we're getting into some of the books that I was not as excited about. So the next book that I read was Unwind by Neal Shusterman, and this is one that I was really intrigued by because I've heard really good things about it. I've heard really good things about a lot of Neal Shusterman's books, so I wanted to try this one out. And I had a very mixed opinion of this book. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it. I just was kind of, I have mixed opinions, so we'll just get into it. Okay, so the premise of this book is that it takes place in the future United States, where there was another like civil war over reproductive rights, and the only way to end the war was to come to some kind of compromise. The compromise that they settled on was that if someone becomes pregnant, they have to have the baby. They cannot terminate a pregnancy, and raise the child up until the age of reason, which I don't totally know when that is. I don't think they said what age is the age of reason, but it may have been like 12 or something. I'm not really sure. After the age of reason, between whatever age that is, up until 18, they can have a child unwound. Unwound pretty much means that they are a forced organ donor. So they're sent off to these like harvest camps, and their body is taken apart and they harvest every part of their body. Part of the law that allows this to happen is that every single part of their body must be used in some way. They also believe that technically the person isn't dead, because their body parts are still like living in another person's body, whoever it is, like, you know, donated to. So it's technically not killing the person, and so like somehow this is supposed to appease both sides. One of my main issues with this is that I think the premise is kind of ridiculous. But if we are accepting that that premise is true, okay, so we're just going like, whether I like the premise or not, this is what's happening. I think he did a really good job of it's very well thought out of how this premise would affect the country and individuals, and just it was just very well thought out. And I really appreciated how much thought went into all of the ramifications of what having a law like this would mean for people, and how it would affect like the zeitgeist of the country, how it would affect individuals and different parts of our culture, like new parts of culture that would either like die off or pop up because of it. So I thought that was really good. It was very well thought out, and I really appreciated that. I had a little bit of a hard time with the pacing of the book. I thought the beginning was interesting because it starts off very like dramatically, because we're following three perspectives in this of three young people who are going to be sent to be unwound, and they are trying to escape that fate. So it's very dramatic at the beginning that they're trying to save themselves, but then it gets very slow in the middle. But I thought it had a really strong ending. I think one of the reasons that it lost me in the middle was because it started to focus less on how this dystopian world was impacting the individual, and more just on the individuals themselves and their lives, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but that's not really what I want out of a dystopian, because then it starts to feel like the dystopian setting is just sort of a backdrop, and it could be any other kind of story. It doesn't need to be a dystopian. I like to see how relevant and important this dystopian world is and how it's impacting these individuals. And this, I think, got bogged down in like the day-to-day lives of these individuals in a way that just like wasn't interesting to me. So I ended up giving this 3.5 stars because there were some things that I kind of struggled with, and this book was just making me feel very like ugh about my reading. But I did think it was very well thought out. I did like the ending a lot. There is one scene that I will definitely have like a content warning for, that there is a scene in this where we are with one of the characters while they are being unwound. So we're seeing from his perspective in his mind as the process is happening. And it's not a scene that like, it's not gory or graphic at all, but it is horrifying to be in his mind as this is happening. So I would put a warning on it for that. And the next book that I have is my least favorite book of the month, which is The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden. So this is one that I buddy read with my friend Kara from Wild Book Garden. I'll link her channel below. Because both of us read the first book, which is The Bear and the Nightingale, and neither of us liked it very much, but we wanted to give the series another try because we know like it's a very well-loved series. It sounds like something that both of us would like, so we wanted to love it. Decided to buddy read the next one for moral support, and oh my god, I hated this book so much. And it was a mix of that this book just like made me angry, but I also didn't really care enough to be angry, so it just made me tired. It just was like so draining to read this book, and like maybe I should have DNF'd it because of how much I didn't like it, but like I don't know, with things like this, like I wanted to love it and I wanted to give it a fair shot. I wanted to read the whole book and just know for sure how I feel about it, and I just kept hoping it was gonna get better, and it just didn't. So this book is the second one in a series, but it's a Russian folklore inspired setting. It's very wintry. I don't find the writing to be especially atmospheric, even though I know that's one of the things that people always say about this book is how beautiful the writing is and how beautiful the atmosphere is. I don't find it atmospheric at all. I can't stand the main character, Vasya. She is so annoying. She's so stupid. And also, I think she's a really shallow, flat character. She's not well developed. She doesn't really grow. And I also think that she's supposed to be a strong female character, but she's not. Like, she's a very shallow interpretation of what a strong female character is and what that means. Because she is she tries to act like she's independent, but really she just makes a lot of stupid decisions and is constantly like, you can't tell me what to do, you can't control me, I won't take anyone's advice, even when it's good advice and she's being an idiot. She's also just indiscriminately stubborn about things in ways that don't make any sense. And all of the things that are given to us as like character traits that we're supposed to like know about her, again, are very shallow things that doesn't make a character. Like, I know that she wants to travel. They say like, why do you want to travel? She's like, because I want to travel. Like, that's the extent of the reasoning that we get about why she wants to travel. And like, wanting to travel, like, cool, great. That doesn't make a personality though. And that was my problem with the first book too, is there were so many things that I was like, this doesn't make a personality. This doesn't make a character. There was no part of this character that I thought was engaging or interesting or like anything. I didn't like any of the other characters in this book except for the horse. There is a talking horse in this and he was the best part. If it had been a book about the horse, I may have liked it. He had a good head on his shoulders. He was a good, like, he was a thinker. I liked him. Other than the horse, everyone hated them. And this has a romance trope in it that I hate so much that I'm gonna make a video, I think, about this romance trope because I don't know, like, what to call it, and explaining it is gonna take too long for this wrap up. And it's a trope that I have been seeing a lot recently, and reading this is what really like solidified in my mind like what this trope is. So I think I'm gonna be doing a video about that. But I guess I'm glad that I read it. Now I know I can completely like DNF this series. I'm never gonna pick it up again. I gave this 2 stars. Now with the amount I've ranted, I'm wondering if I should have given it 1 star, but I think I gave it 2 stars, so we're just gonna leave it there. Then I had another book that I did not like. So this is the middle part of the month that was just like real rough for me, and this one maybe I should have DNF'd also, but I just wanted to like it. Anyways, I read Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler. This is the second book in the Pattern Master series. The first one I didn't love, but I didn't hate it either. But last year I read Kindred by Octavia Butler, which is totally separate from this. They're not related at all, but it was one of my favorite books of the year, so I really wanted to give more of her books a try, so I thought I would try to continue this series because this one's a little more science fiction-y than Kindred. And that was just a bad choice. So the premise of this is that there is this guy named Doro who, it's unclear in this, but I think he's an alien, or he has been infected by an alien species that has like bonded, has genetically bonded with him. So that's a thing that's happened on Earth apparently. There's not a lot of explanation for that. I only know that because I looked up the Wikipedia page about it, so it's not even explained in this book. But he is like 4,000 years old or something, and he has been essentially like breeding a master race of people, because people who have bonded with this alien species have powers. And there are lots of different kinds of powers. The ones he's especially interested in are like telepathic powers. And we are following one of these people that he has created or bred, that he is thinking is going to be kind of the culmination of all of this hundreds of years of work, that she's going to be what he was looking for. So that is Mary, and that is the main character of this book, and she becomes the pattern master. But this book has, first of all, so many things for like content warnings. Like, first chapter I was already like writing down content warnings. Let me see what my content warnings include: incest, emotional manipulation and abuse, conditioning and grooming people for abuse, people being in love with their abuser, domestic abuse, child neglect, child torture, and child death, and suicide. And talk of rape. So those are some of the things that I noticed and wrote down while I was reading this. There are probably lots of other things that I missed. So be aware of those. It's like 200 pages or so. It felt like it took forever to read this book. But I think that one of the things I really disliked about this book was there was this pervasive feeling of inevitability. That Doro, the one who's been like breeding people, has so much complete control over people's lives and no one can stand against him. And that is one of the things that is supposed to be special about Mary, is that like maybe she's going to be one of the first people who can actually stand up to him. But there's just this like feeling of inevitability, and just that like everything that happens was inevitable, that no one had any choice or agency in how they do things. And even at the end, when things are resolved, it's resolved in a way that, again, it feels inevitable. It doesn't feel like we got this ending because people made choices or like did anything actively. It just felt like it was always going to be, like there was no other way it could have ended. It was all just inevitable. And I just hate that. But yeah, this book, it was just so weird, but not in a good way. It was disturbing, again, not in a good way. And while I was reading it, it was just so stressful to read in a way that I just felt like I had a weight on my chest the whole time I was reading this book. And I just really didn't like it. I don't think I even rated it on Goodreads though, because it was such a weird reading experience. I just don't know what to think of it. If you want to read Octavia Butler, read Kindred. It's amazing. But yeah, I'm not going to be continuing the series. So after reading Mind of My Mind, I was in such a weird reading mood, such a weird place. I don't know if I was feeling like I was in a slump or if I just didn't know what to do with myself, because I'd read so many books in a row that I didn't like and I felt so weird. So it took me a little while to pick my next book. But I ended up picking The Lost Queen by Signe Pike, which I actually had been meaning to read this in November, but for some reason this was just the only thing that was calling to me, the only thing that I seemed interested in reading, so I decided to pick it up, and I'm so glad that I did because I loved this. This is my favorite book of the month. It's probably going to be in one of my favorite books of the year. Like, this was so good and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to be doing a review video just about this book. But to tell you a little bit about this, this is a Celtic historical fiction, takes place in Scotland. It is following the sister of the person who inspired the story of Merlin. And so I think she's like actually a real person that existed, but there's not a lot of information about her. And so this is sort of a reimagining of that character to give her, or of that person and her life, to give her a story, because there is this real life queen that existed and is mentioned briefly in history, but there really isn't a lot of information about her. So in this, our main character is the twin sister of the person who's going to become Merlin, essentially. She is the daughter of a royal family, of kind of like a lesser royal family, because they have like the High King, and then there are like lesser kings, I think. But she wants to live her life as a wisdom keeper, which is essentially what this author is calling druids. She wants to learn lore, she wants to learn herbalism and healing and like serve her people in that way. But her family needs to use her as a political alliance, and so they need to marry her to somebody that will be politically advantageous to them. Her family is very much rooted in the old ways of the old religion that is very connected to the spirituality of the land and the teachings of the druids, or in this world they're called the wisdom keepers. But there is Christianity coming in to the country, and it is kind of changing the people and the landscape of the world that they're living in. And the political marriage that our main character is forced into is actually with a Christian prince who is vying to become the next high king. And she does not want this marriage, but she will do it in order to protect her people. And this book, I loved it so much. I can definitely see why people have compared this to Juliet Marillier's Seven Waters books. That's what first got me interested in this, because I saw somebody mention that it reminded them of the Seven Waters series, which is like one of my favorite series. And I can definitely see that. The writing in this is beautiful and reminds me a lot of Juliet Marillier's writing. It is like slower and denser, but it's so rich and beautiful. And the writing just makes everything about this book better, because there are a lot of scenes that are in nature, because our main character she wishes she could be a healer, and she loves to forage in the forest. A lot of their spirituality is around like nature and trees and things like that. So there's a lot of that, and the writing just makes that really come alive. And also the writing makes the characters so rich and vibrant. One of the things that I found with this is that the trope of a girl who is being married off, like a noble-born girl being married off for a political marriage that she does not want to be a part of, is a very common plot line, very common trope in a book. But I have never been so invested and so distressed by that plot line as I was in this, because of the writing and how much you're connected to these characters. And I could just feel how deeply angry she was about this and how incredibly unfair the situation was, in a way like I've never been so upset about that plot line. This was a book that was also very stressful to read, but in a good way, because I was so invested in these characters and this story. And I was like so stressed out while I was reading this, but like in the best way, because I loved it so much. I'm really glad that I read this. It just put me in such a better reading mood. And I'm really excited for the sequel, which I think is coming out next year. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. I took off half a star just because it has some tropes in it that I don't love. It definitely has some insta-love in it, but again, the way it was done didn't bother me that much. And also there are some tropes of like there's a forbidden love kind of trope and like a cheating. I just don't like that plot line. I don't like that romance trope. But since those are kind of like personal preferences, I just took off half a point. Quality wise, I feel like this is a 5-star, but personal preference, I took off half a star just because I don't like those tropes. All right, so I only have 2 more books to talk about. The next one is The Sea in You, 20 Poems of Requited and Unrequited Love by David White. So this is a book of poetry that I picked up while I was at the like mindfulness gathering that I went to at the end of September, and I really enjoyed this. This is love poetry, but it just feels very different from a lot of other love poetry that I have read. It has this feeling of wonder about the person that whoever it is that he's talking about, whoever his like beloved is that he is talking about. There's this feeling of wonder at just the miracle of who they are, and I just really loved this. And also his writing is so beautiful. There were a few times where I would kind of space out while I was reading it, but I would keep reading just because his use of language is so beautiful that even if I wasn't really processing like the story of what the poem was about, I loved the experience of reading his words. So I really liked this one. And the last book that I finished in September was Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself by Kristen Neff. And this is a nonfiction book that I was reading because self-compassion or mindful self-compassion is a kind of subgenre of mindfulness that I think is especially interesting and I've been learning more about, and Kristen Neff was speaking at the meditation or mindfulness gathering that I went to. And I think her research is just really interesting. This is her first book, I think, that talks about kind of the basics of her research in self-compassion and her definitions of self-compassion and all of that. And this one, I thought this one was really interesting. It has a lot of the same information that I already knew because I have taken some like classes and workshops and stuff about mindful self-compassion, and I've seen like Kristen Neff speak before, so I was familiar with a lot of the content. One of the things that I found most interesting about this one though is that in this book she does talk about like the research about it, but also a lot of this is about her personal story and what she has gone through that kind of led her to researching and being so passionate about self-compassion and how it's impacted her life. And so you get a lot of like personal stories. And one of the things that I think is really really interesting is when people are able to be really like vulnerable about what has happened in their lives and what brought them to doing the work that they're doing, and how they have like their own struggles. She talks about her own struggles with self-compassion, her own ups and downs in life and mistakes that she's made, and how self-compassion has impacted her life and helped her through it. And it just is really interesting, and also I just think very admirable when people are able to be vulnerable in that way, and I think that it allows people to connect with the concepts more fully. So I really enjoyed this one. So that is all for my September wrap up. This video, I can tell, is going to be really long. I thought this was going to be a shorter one because I had fewer books than previous months, but I know I talked a lot. So thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.